Welcome home, Your Grace.
Who are you?
I am Sebastian Holloway, the Duke of Ashcombe. And you are my Duchess.
She thought she had married a poor farmer, but before sunrise, she had unknowingly become the Duchess of one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, and the greatest secret was still waiting behind those gates.
The debt was crushing. The stranger at her door was calm. Ophelia had one night left to save her dying mother from a fate she could not undo, and only one impossible offer waiting on her doorstep. A mud-streaked man with rough hands and a quiet voice. A bank draft bearing the exact sum she owed. A proposal that made no sense at all: marry him before sunrise, leave everything she knew behind, and never ask why. The villagers whispered that grief had finally broken her judgment. They said a girl with nothing left to lose had settled for a farmer with even less. But when the carriage finally slowed, and the Rortian gates parted before a manor carved from stone and gold, and rows of servants bowed low along the drive, the head butler's voice cut through the winter air like a blade.
Welcome home, Your Grace.
Ophelia turned, slow and disbelieving, to the man in the dirt-stained boots, the man who had sworn he was nothing but a farmer, the man she had married at dawn without even knowing his true name. He was already watching her, and he did not look surprised at all. If your pulse just picked up the way hers did, stay close, because this is only the beginning of what Ophelia is about to uncover behind those gates. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the roof over Ophelia's small cottage had given up fighting it. Water traced dark lines down the plaster, pooling near the hearth where her mother lay wrapped in every blanket they owned. Margaret's breathing rattled, thin and uneven, each exhaling a small victory against the illness eating away at her from the inside. Ophelia knelt beside the bed, pressing a damp cloth to her mother's forehead, whispering words she no longer fully believed herself. "You'll be well soon. We'll manage. We always manage."
But the ledger on the table told a different story.
Numbers she had recalculated a dozen times, hoping they might change through sheer will. Medicine costs that climbed faster than she could earn. A debt that had swallowed everything: her father's tools, her mother's jewelry, the last of their savings, and still it grew, hungry and merciless.
A sharp knock cracked against the door.
Ophelia's spine went rigid. She knew that knock. Heavy. Deliberate. The knock of a man who took pleasure in delivering bad news. She opened the door to find the bailiff standing in the downpour, dry beneath an oiled coat, his expression carved from stone. Behind him 2 men waited with a cart, ready to strip her home of anything worth selling. 7 days, he said, not bothering with greetings. Pay the full sum, or the cottage and everything in it belongs to the estate. 7 days, Ophelia repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. My mother is dying. Where do you expect me to? That is not my concern. He glanced past her, toward the frail woman on the bed, and something in his gaze made Ophelia want to slam the door against him. 7 days, he said again, and turned back into the rain. She shut the door and pressed her back against it, breathing hard, willing herself not to cry. Crying solved nothing. It never had.
Her mother stirred. Ophelia.
It's nothing, Mama. Rest. But it was nothing. It was everything. 7 days to find a sum of money she could not earn in 7 years. That night, after her mother finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Ophelia sat by the dying fire, staring at the ledger as though it might rearrange itself into mercy. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to her fear. She did not sleep. She could not. And so she was awake bone-tired, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the cold when the second knock came, just past midnight. This one was different. Quieter. Almost hesitant, as though the hand behind it wasn't certain it had the right to ask for entry. Ophelia opened the door with the fire poker still gripped in her hand, prepared for another cruelty.
Instead, she found a stranger.
He stood beneath the eave, drenched despite it, dark hair plastered to his forehead, jaw shadowed with days of stubble. His clothes marked him plainly as a labourer coarse trousers stained with mud, suspenders worn thin, boots caked in dirt so old it had become part of the leather. And yet, there was something in the way he stood, straight-backed, unshaken by the storm. His eyes, when they met hers, held a weight that did not belong to a man who worked fields for coins. "Miss Ophelia," he said, voice low and rough. "My name is Sebastian Holloway. I have a proposal that will save your mother's life, if you're willing to hear it." She should have shut the door. Every instinct told her a stranger appearing at midnight with a proposal meant danger, not salvation. But desperation has a way of silencing instinct. Say what you came to say. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, offering it without ceremony. Ophelia unfolded it with trembling fingers and her breath caught. A bank draft. The exact sum. To the shilling. How she started, but he spoke over her, calm and unhurried, as though he had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. "In exchange, I ask only one thing, that you marry me. Tomorrow at dawn." The words hung in the cold air between them, absurd and impossible. "Marry you," she repeated. "I don't even know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't. But your mother will have her medicine, and this house will remain yours, and no bailiff will darken that door again. That is the only truth that should matter tonight." Ophelia looked from the draft to the stranger's face, searching for the trick, the catch, the cruelty hiding beneath the offer. She found none. Only that same steady, unreadable calm, as though he had already decided this was the only path forward, and was simply waiting for her to catch up. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for a woman you've never met?" Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. "Because I need a wife who wants nothing from me but honesty," he said. "And because your mother does not have time for you to ask more questions than that." The fire popped behind her. Margaret's breathing rattled from the next room, fragile as parchment. Ophelia closed her eyes. I opened them again. "Dawn," she said. "You'll wait outside until then. And if this is some cruel trick..." "It isn't." His voice did not waver. "You have my word, Ophelia. Whatever else I may be, I will not break it." She did not know, standing in that doorway with rain soaking through her shawl, that his word was the one thing about him that was entirely true, and everything else was a carefully constructed lie built to protect something far larger than either of them, yet understood. The chapel Sebastian led her to before sunrise was nothing like the churches Ophelia had imagined as a girl, back when she still allowed herself to imagine weddings at all. No flowers. No guests. Just cold stone walls, a solitary priest roused from sleep, and candlelight flickering weakly against the dark. Ophelia stood at the altar in the same worn dress she'd worn the night before, her hair hastily pinned, her hands ice-cold in Sebastian's steady grip. He, too, wore what he'd arrived in mud-streaked trousers, a plain linen shirt, boots that had clearly walked more miles than any farmer's shoulder. The priest's voice droned through the vows, unhurried despite the hour, and Ophelia found herself speaking the words back mechanically, her mind elsewhere on her mother, on the ledger now settled, on the strange man whose hand had not once loosened its hold on hers. Do you, Sebastian Holloway, take this woman? Holloway. She turned the name over in her thoughts. A plain name. A farmer's name. It should have meant nothing. It would mean everything soon enough. I do, Sebastian said, his voice steady, quiet, and for just a moment, something almost gentle passed behind his eyes as he looked at her. I do, Ophelia echoed, though the words felt borrowed from someone else's life. The priest pronounced them wed, with none of the warmth such words usually carried, and just like that, it was done. A marriage forged not from love, but from desperation and a debt now paid. They stepped out into the pale grey light of dawn and Ophelia stopped short. A carriage waited at the edge of the churchyard. Not the humble cart she'd expected from a man dressed as Sebastian was. This was polished black, trimmed in gold, its interior a deep, rich red velvet visible through the open door. 2 footmen stood at attention beside it, dressed far too finely for any farmer's employ. Sebastian, Ophelia said carefully, whose carriage is this? Ours, he said simply, offering his hand to help her inside. We have a journey ahead of us. She hesitated at the carriage door, studying him, the mud on his boots, the plain cut of his shirt, and now this. The pieces did not fit, and something in her chest tightened with the first true stirrings of unease. Sebastian, she said again, quieter this time. What exactly have I agreed to? He met her gaze, and for just a heartbeat, she saw something flicker behind his composure, not deceit exactly, but the careful weight of a truth not yet spoken. You'll understand soon enough, he said. I promise you that. It was not the answer she wanted. But the carriage door was open, her mother was safe behind her, and there was no path left but forward.
She climbed inside.
The carriage rolled for hours. Through countryside Ophelia had never seen rolling hills giving way to manicured hedgerows, then wrought-iron fences stretching farther than she could follow with her eyes. She watched the world change outside the window, and beside her, Sebastian remained quiet, occasionally glancing at her as though gauging how much longer her patience would hold. It held until the carriage began to slow. Ahead, framed by towering iron gates, stood a manor so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon, pale stone walls carved with intricate Baroque details, arched windows catching the morning light, a sweeping drive lined with trimmed hedges and marble statues. It was the kind of estate Ophelia had only glimpsed in illustrated books, the sort of place that belonged to dukes and earls, not farmers. Sebastian, she breathed, what is this place? He did not answer. The carriage rolled through the gates, and rows of servants emerged along the drive, dressed in crimson and gold livery, falling into perfect lines as though they had done this 100 times before, as though they had been expecting exactly this arrival. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door, and Sebastian stepped out first, offering his hand to help her down. Ophelia took it, her legs unsteady, her mind racing to make sense of the impossible scene unfolding around her. An older man in fine dark livery stepped forward from the assembled staff, bowing low, not the shallow nod one gave a passing labourer, but a deep formal bow reserved for nobility.
Welcome home, Your Grace, the butler said.
The words landed like a blow. Ophelia's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Sebastian, searching his face for some sign this was a mistake, a jest, anything but what it so clearly was. He was already watching her, and he did not look surprised at all. Your Grace, she repeated, barely a whisper. You told me you were a farmer. I told you a great many things, Sebastian said quietly, that were not entirely lies, Ophelia. Only incomplete. Around them, the servants remained bowed, waiting, as though the world itself paused for her to absorb what she had married into. The mud on his boots suddenly seemed like a costume rather than the truth. The plain linen shirt, a disguise worn too well. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. "Sebastian Holloway," he said. "Duke of Ashcombe. Everything else I told you remains true. Your mother is safe. Your debt is paid. And you are, as of this morning, my Duchess." The title landed strangely in the cold morning air grand, foreign, entirely unearned by a girl who, only yesterday, had been scrubbing floors to keep her mother warm. Ophelia stared at the manor rising behind him, at the servants still bowed in formal silence, and felt the ground shift beneath a life she no longer recognized as her own.
"Explain," she said. "Now, all of it."
Sebastian glanced once at the assembled staff, then back to her, something resolute settling into his expression. "Not here," he said. "Come inside. You deserve the whole truth. Ophelia and I intend to give it to you." He led her through the grand entrance, past halls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, into a private study where a fire already burned, warm and steady, nothing like the dying embers of her cottage hearth. He closed the door behind them, and for the first time since she'd met him, Sebastian looked uncertain. "My father," he began, "died 3 years ago, leaving the dukedom to me under circumstances that were never fully explained. Since then, I have suspected my estate is being slowly, deliberately drained by those closest to it, men who believe a duke too naive or too distracted by grief to notice missing funds and forged accounts. So you disguised yourself," Ophelia said slowly, "as a farmer. To move freely. To observe without being observed. To find a wife who would marry me for something other than my title or my coin. Because everyone who has approached me since my father's death has wanted one thing only, and it was never me. And you thought disguising an entire marriage was the answer. I thought," Sebastian said, quieter now, "that if a woman could look at me with mud on my boots and nothing in my pockets, and still choose to trust me, then perhaps she was someone worth trusting in return." Ophelia felt something twist in her chest. Anger. Yes, but beneath it, something more complicated. He had used her desperation, but he had also, in his strange and roundabout way, chosen her because of who she was, not despite it. "You lied to me," she said. "On the day I married you." "Yes." "You let me believe I was marrying a poor man." "Yes." "And you knew, this entire time, that I would walk into this house utterly unprepared for what waited." "I did," Sebastian admitted. "And for that, I am asking your forgiveness, not your gratitude." Ophelia crossed her arms, studying him in the firelight, searching for any last trace of the calm, unshaken stranger who had stood in her doorway. He was still there, she realized. Duke or farmer, the steadiness in his eyes hadn't changed. "If we are to remain married," she said slowly, "there are conditions." Something shifted in his expression, not quite relief, but close. "Name them." "I will not be paraded as an ornament in your halls. I will not be silenced when I have questions, and I will not be protected from truths that concern my own life. If there is danger here, and clearly there is, I will know of it. All of it. Agreed. And you will not lie to me again. Not to protect me. Not to manage me. Never again." Sebastian stepped closer, and for the first time, something raw broke through his composed exterior. "You have my word, Ophelia. Whatever comes next, you will face it beside me, not behind me." Outside, the estate stretched vast and golden under the morning sun, hiding within its walls the very conspiracy that had shattered her family once before, though neither of them yet knew how deeply their two shattered pasts were already entwined. But that was the truth for another day. For now, there was only the fire, the fragile new vows between them, and a partnership neither had intended to build yet one that had already, quietly, begun. The days that followed settled into something almost like peace mornings of tea in the sunlit breakfast room. Afternoons where Sebastian showed her the estate's sprawling grounds, evenings where they spoke of small, ordinary things as though testing what an honest marriage might feel like. But Ophelia had not forgotten his confession by the fire. A conspiracy, he'd said. Someone is draining the estate. And she had never been a woman content to wait for danger to introduce itself. So she began in the library. The estate's records filled an entire wing, ledgers stretching back decades, tenant accounts, harvest tallies, correspondence yellowed with age. Most people would have found it tedious. Ophelia found it familiar. She had spent years stretching impossible sums to cover her mother's medicine, learning to read numbers the way other women read faces for the lies hidden beneath them. It took her 3 days to find the first discrepancy. A tenant farm listed as producing half its usual yield 3 years running, despite records showing full harvests sold at market. The money from that difference had gone somewhere. Not into the estate's coffers. Her pulse quickened. She turned the page, found another. Then another. "You found something," Sebastian said from the doorway, and Ophelia startled, not having heard him enter. "I've found several things," she said, sliding the ledgers toward him. "Someone has been altering the tenant accounts. Small enough not to draw notice individually. But together." Sebastian studied the pages, his jaw tightening. "This has been happening since before my father died." "Which means," Ophelia said quietly, "whoever is responsible has had years to cover their tracks. And good reason to make certain no one ever looked closely enough to notice." Sebastian's eyes lifted to hers, something sharp and grateful passing behind them. "No one has looked at this closely. Not even my own solicitors." "Then it's fortunate," Ophelia said, "that your solicitors didn't marry me." A faint, unwilling smile tugged at his mouth, the first real one she'd seen from him since the chapel. It did something strange to her chest, seeing it. But the smile did not last. Because 2 days later, a letter arrived announcing that Sebastian's relatives, his uncle, Lord Reginald Ashcombe, and his cousin Marcus would be arriving within the week to welcome the new Duchess. Ophelia read the falseness in that word immediately. The evening of the dinner party arrived with candlelight and cold formality. Lord Reginald swept into the dining hall first, silver-haired and smiling in a way that never once reached his eyes. Marcus followed close behind, sharp-featured and watchful, his gaze lingering on Ophelia, a beat too long assessing, calculating, the way one might study an unexpected obstacle. "The new Duchess," Reginald said, taking her hand with practiced charm. "Sebastian, you never mentioned finding a bride so unconventional." "I found precisely the wife I wanted," Sebastian said evenly. "That should concern no one." Dinner unfolded with the particular cruelty of polished manners, every compliment a thinly veiled insult, every question designed to expose Ophelia as an outsider unworthy of her new title. She endured it with practiced calm, the same calm that had carried her through years of scorn from villagers who had called her family cursed. But then Marcus, swirling his wine with false casualness, said, "Tell us, Duchess, has Sebastian shown you the tenant ledgers yet? Estate management can be terribly dull for someone unused to such complexity." It was meant as condescension. Ophelia chose to hear it as an opening. "Dull," she agreed pleasantly, "though I did find the Hartwell Farms yield curiously inconsistent these past 3 years. Half production reported, yet full harvests sold at market. I wonder where that difference in coins went." Silence fell like a dropped blade. Reginald's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes turned to ice. A misunderstanding, surely. Estate records are complicated. They are, Ophelia agreed, holding his gaze without flinching. Which is precisely why I intend to understand every page of them. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Reginald recovered his composure with practiced ease, steering the conversation towards safer waters, but Ophelia caught the glance the two men exchanged beneath the candlelight, brief and sharp as a blade unsheathed. She had struck something true, and she had made herself a target for striking it. Sebastian said nothing throughout dinner, but later that night, in the quiet of the study, he turned to her with something between admiration and alarm. "You've made enemies of them tonight." "They were already my enemies," Ophelia said. "I simply let them know I'd noticed." "That was reckless." "That was necessary." She met his gaze steadily. "You cannot fight a conspiracy by tiptoeing around its architects, Sebastian. Someone had to show them we already suspected the truth." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable worry perhaps, or something warmer moving behind his eyes. "Then we do this together. No more secrets between us. Not after tonight." "No more secrets," Ophelia agreed. Neither of them yet understood how quickly that promise would be tested. A few days later, Sebastian proposed a ride through the estate's northern boundary, wanting Ophelia to see the tenant farms firsthand, the very lands whose falsified records she'd uncovered. The carriage rolled along a narrow forest road, autumn light slanting gold through bare branches, the world outside deceptively peaceful. "The Hartwell farm should be just past this ridge," Sebastian said, glancing out the window. "I want you to see the discrepancy for yourself, meet the tenants who—" The carriage lurched violently. Ophelia was thrown against the seat as the horses screamed, the vehicle tilting sharply before crashing to a stop at an angle. One wheel splintered against a fallen log that had not been there an hour before. Through the window, she caught sight of two figures on horseback at the tree line retreating fast, faces hidden beneath dark hoods. "Sebastian?" Ophelia gasped, but he was already moving, throwing the carriage door open, positioning himself between her and the road with an instinct that spoke of training far beyond a duke's usual education. "Stay down," he ordered, voice low and hard. A third rider emerged from the trees, closing the distance fast, something metallic catching the fading light in his grip. Sebastian didn't hesitate. He moved with brutal, practiced efficiency, closing the distance and dragging the man from his saddle before he could close on the carriage. The struggle was short, vicious, and entirely one-sided within moments. Sebastian had the attacker pinned, a blade wrenched from his grip and cast aside. "Who sent you?" Sebastian demanded, his voice a low growl. Ophelia had never heard from him. The man said nothing, eyes darting toward the trees, and Sebastian's grip tightened. "Who?" But the man wrenched free, scrambling into the underbrush before either of them could stop him, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. Sebastian turned back to the carriage, and for the first time since she'd met him, Ophelia saw something close to fear cross his features, not for himself, but for her. "Are you hurt?" His hands found her shoulders, searching, careful. "I'm fine," she breathed, though her heart hammered wildly. "Sebastian, that locket didn't fall. It was placed." "I know." His jaw was tight, his eyes hard with fury, and something else, something that looked, in that unguarded moment, remarkably like terror at how close she'd come to harm. They're no longer content to simply drain the estate quietly. They mean to remove obstacles entirely. "They mean to remove me," Ophelia said quietly. "They will have to go through me first," Sebastian said, low and fierce, pulling her against him with a suddenness that startled them both. "I did not marry you to bury you, Ophelia. Whatever this becomes, I will not lose you to it." She should have pulled away. Instead, standing on that broken road with danger still thick in the air, Ophelia let herself lean into him, feeling for the first time that whatever this marriage had begun as, it had become something far more dangerous to lose than a bank draft or a debt repaid. The attack changed everything. Sebastian called for a formal estate inquiry within the fortnight, a legal proceeding before the county magistrates to address, officially, the irregularities in the ledgers, forcing the conspiracy into daylight where it could no longer hide behind polite dinners and quiet threats. Reginald and Marcus arrived with their own solicitors, sharp-suited men carrying leather folios thick with documents. Prepared Ophelia realized instantly not to defend against accusation, but to launch one of their own. The grand ballroom had been transformed for the occasion, magistrates seated at a long table beneath the arched windows. Sebastian and Ophelia seated opposite Reginald's assembled legal counsel. "Your Grace," Reginald's solicitor began smoothly, "we have here documentation suggesting the current Duke suffers from instabilities following his father's death, records of erratic decision-making, questionable financial choices, and now a hasty marriage to a woman of no standing, undertaken within hours of meeting her." He slid forged papers across the table, falsified physician's notes, manufactured records painting Sebastian as unfit to hold his title. "These documents," Sebastian said, voice tight with restrained fury, "are fabrications." "They are notarized," Reginald's solicitor said pleasantly. "Quite legally binding, Your Grace." The magistrates exchanged glances, and Ophelia felt the room tilting dangerously toward disaster, toward exactly the outcome Reginald had spent years engineering.
She rose from her seat.
"If it pleases the court," Ophelia said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart, "I have evidence that speaks rather more directly to the truth of this matter." She placed her own collection of documents on the table, 3 weeks of careful, painstaking work laid bare. The falsified Hartwell farm yields, tampered tenant ledgers spanning years, cross-referenced against actual market sale records she'd quietly obtained from village merchants. And beneath them, older records, still her mother's hidden recovery notes. Documents Ophelia hadn't understood the significance of until she'd found them again among her own family's belongings and recognized, with a cold jolt, the same handwriting that appeared in the estate's forged accounts. "These ledgers," Ophelia said, "prove systematic embezzlement spanning at least 3 years, orchestrated to drain this estate under the appearance of legitimate mismanagement. And these," she lifted her mother's notes, hands steady despite the tremor in her chest, "prove the same network of corrupt administrators falsified evidence against my own family years ago, to silence my mother as a witness to an earlier fraud entirely."
The room went utterly still.
"This is preposterous," Reginald snapped, his composure finally cracking. "A grieving girl's fantasies, nothing more." "The handwriting matches, my lord," Ophelia said quietly. "Your own solicitor's hand, in fact, on documents dated 7 years before I ever met your nephew. This was never only about draining Sebastian's estate. It was about silencing anyone who might one day connect the two frauds." The lead magistrate examined the documents in lengthening silence, comparing signatures, cross-referencing dates, his expression growing darker with each page turned. "Lord Reginald," the magistrate said finally, voice grave, "these documents, if verified, and I have little doubt they shall be, constitute evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy spanning years and 2 separate families. You will be detained pending full investigation." Marcus bolted for the door and found it already blocked by estate guards, summoned in advance at Sebastian's quiet instruction. Reginald's mask of civility finally shattered entirely, fury and panic twisting his features as guards moved to restrain him. "You cannot prove," he began.
"I already have," Ophelia said simply.
Within the hour, Both men were led away in disgrace, the conspiracy that had haunted two families for years, finally, irrevocably broken. That evening the manor felt different, lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled a breath held too long. Ophelia found Sebastian in the study, staring into the fire, the weight of the day's victory not yet fully settled into relief. "Your mother," he said quietly as she entered. "The physician confirmed it this afternoon. With proper treatment now fully funded and uninterrupted, she has every chance at a complete recovery." Ophelia felt something crack open in her chest, relief so profound it nearly buckled her knees. "Truly?" "Truly," Sebastian said, rising to meet her. "Whatever else has happened between us, Ophelia, that much at least is entirely real." She looked at him, this man who had lied to her at a cottage door and told her the truest thing of her. Life in the same breath, and felt something settle inside her that she hadn't expected to feel again. Trust. Not blind, not naive, but earned, slowly, through fire and danger and 3 weeks of ledgers read late into the night. "There is one more thing," Ophelia said, moving to the desk, retrieving the original marriage contract, the hastily signed document from that cold chapel dawn, the paper that had bound them together, a stranger's trading debt for duty. She held it toward the fire.
Ophelia.
"This," she said, "was a contract between two strangers. A farmer and a desperate girl, neither of whom existed beyond that morning." She met his eyes, steady and sure. "I want something new between us now, Sebastian. Not an arrangement. A partnership. Equals, choosing each other freely, not because a debt demanded it." Sebastian, the hand covered hers on the paper, and together they fed it to the flames. The old contract curled and blackened, the ash rising and scattering into the chimney's dark throat, carrying with it every lie born of necessity, every fear born of desperation, every secret that had once stood between a duke in disguise and a girl who refused to stop asking questions. What remained, standing together in the firelight, was something neither of them had planned for. Back when this had all begun as a bank draft and a desperate bargain. Something real. Something chosen. Something that, ash and all, felt very much like the beginning of an actual marriage, not the ending of a debt, but the start of a life neither of them intended to face alone again.
If Ophelia's courage in that ballroom made your heart pound the way it made mine while writing it, tell me, honestly, would you have burned that first contract too, or kept it as a reminder of how far you'd come? Drop your answer below, because I read every single one of them. And if Sebastian and Ophelia's story left you wanting more nights like this, one more strangers with secrets, more desperate girls who turn out to be the bravest ones in the room, follow along, because the next story is already waiting behind its own set of locked gates.